And when we're not hustling, we believe that seeing sex workers as full people outside of our work is an essential step toward humanizing and destigmatizing the industry and those who work within it. Help us to bring you the stories of the people behind the fantasies. When We're Not Hustling is a 501c3 fiscally sponsored nonprofit project of the Social Good Fund. Thank you for considering a tax-deductible recurring contribution. All contributions will be received through our fiscal sponsor, the Social Good Fund. You can contribute at nothustling.com.
Put away the lingerie. I wanna know you. Tell me more. I don't care about the hear about you and see the world from your point of view. The coffee's already made, so I'll part the shades, just pull up a chair and tell me more.
Welcome to When We're Not Hustling, a podcast where sex workers talk about everything but. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. When We're Not Hustling is a weekly podcast that explores the lives and identities of sex workers outside of our work personas, our personal philosophies, ambitions, families, relationships, passions, spirituality, and so much more. We talk about our lives beyond the job, asking, what does the flexibility of sex work allow us to do, and who does it allow us to be? On our show, we learn who sex workers are outside of the work we're known for. When We're Not Hustling is an exploration of the people behind the fantasies. When We're Not Hustling is brought to you by Assembly 4. Assembly 4 is a collective of sex workers and technologists working to bring the overall cost of sex work down through their advertising platform Tryst.link. They also educate clients through the Good Client Guide and provide resources and articles written by and for sex workers. Assembly 4 caters to all genders and demographics and raises funds to fight for sex worker rights and against exploitation in the industry. Learn more about Assembly 4 at assemblyfour.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of When We're Not Hustling. I'm your producer, Emily Foster, filling in for Jessie Sage. This month we have our highly anticipated crossover episode with Tryst.com, where a lovely guest writes an essay posted on Tryst.com, and then we interview that same guest about the same subject. As always, we have another amazing giveaway to accompany these episodes, and this is the final week for this giveaway as it closes on March 23rd at midnight Eastern Standard Time. So one lucky listener is going to receive a custom-made leather harness from our guest, Mia. To enter this contest, follow us on socials. That's at NotHustlingPod on X, Insta, or Blue Sky. For additional entries, share any of your favorite episodes and tag us. This week, Jessie sits down with Zalika, and these two academics treat us to a heady conversation that is delightfully grounded in laughter and lived experience, covering subjects such as what is it to be human, how Blackness is seen versus how it is lived, and how the term no humans involved has been used in subjugation throughout history. By way of introduction, Zalika U, Mbararimi, PhD, also going under the artist name No Human Involved, NHI, is a former sex worker, anti-disciplinary artist, assistant professor of Black sexualities in the Department of African American and African Studies at The Ohio State University, and a 2021-2023 Carter G. Woodson Predoctoral Fellow at the University of Virginia. She engages in Black material and digital publics as landscapes to trace the human sexual geographies between the relation of the Black femme and the spectator. Their relationality is tethered to the logics of shame, desire, and pleasure. Additionally, they consider the discursiveness of critical and revolutionary humanism as modes to chart the defiguration of the Black whore vis-a-vis the counter and anti-human. They are currently working on 2 book projects, Haunted Femmes, Haunting Spectators, and Becoming, NHI, in 3 acts, her performance, a crypto porno titled Becoming on Humanist Edging, and this will screen beginning this month, March 2025. Without further ado, let's get right to this conversation.
Hi, Z. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello.
I am very excited to talk to you. We are working together on a book project right now.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've talked about it on this show or not yet, but the book project is through Working Girls Press, and Adri Rose is the editor, and it is called I Hate My Job. And all of it, I've never worked on a book like this where every contributor is writing like multiple essays. I think that's going to be really neat. There's 10 contributors. There's 4 different sections. One's on capitalism, one is on class drag, one is on, oh my gosh, what are the other 2 on?
Lord, I forget.
I forget. Anyways, it doesn't matter. It's going to be amazing. They're all like connected to labor and sex work and capitalism. And I think it's going to be neat to see like 4 different perspectives from the same person, like over everybody's essays. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. How did you get involved with it?
Same here. I'm excited as well. So honestly, Working Girls Press had contacted me through my university email, and I was really excited because I haven't been doing as much non-academic writing. So I immediately just wanted to get on board. It just sounded like the perfect thing.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, and I've worked with them before on the Holy Hour, and they were really great to work with. And I love working with sex workers. And one of the things that I notice about working with sex workers, because I've also written for Trist, but then I also do a lot of mainstream writing too. The difference between writing for sex workers and writing for anyone else is that they pay you. They pay you like up front, and they're like, oh, we got to get you your money. Nobody's going to work for us for free.
They could not say the same for academic writing. But
no. Yeah, I mean, I get paid for my other writing, but like sometimes when they get around to it, I don't know when. This is not the case working for sex workers. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about the other work that you're doing.
So absolutely. So I'm currently a professor at The Ohio State University in the Department of African American and African Studies, and I'm an assistant professor of Black sexualities. And so currently right now I'm working on 2 book projects. Fingers crossed, we're trying to get those book contracts. We'll see what happens. But the first one is called Haunted Femmes, Haunting Spectators, and the second book is called Becoming No Humans Involved in 3 Acts. And the first one really deals with the so-called deviant Black femme subjects as it relates to material and digital public. So essentially Black material and digital publics in the ways that they actually engage with these, so-called deviant Black femme figures who in many ways either were murdered or might have died in some unusual ways. Whereas the second project, I would say, is a continuation of that work.
Okay.
But instead, this time around, I'm really focused on what I would call the Black whore figure or unfigure, actually, in a roundabout way, as I'm really thinking about disfigurement in a different way in terms of being. But I'm doing this or channeling this idea or this premise through the notion of no humans involved, which we do understand in many ways is a police code. But I would also say in Black studies spaces, there's a different kind of conversation emerging that's a little bit more discursive and abstract, speaks to this nature of Blackness and anti-Blackness. But I want to kind of think about it in 3 different ways. So I'm thinking about it ontologically, politically, and also aesthetically as well.
Oh, so those are the 3 acts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for people outside of academia who don't know, ontologically means like the idea of being. So like, I guess you're thinking about that in terms of like, what does it mean to be categorized as something like no humans involved? Or
yes, so I'm really thinking, right. So thinking about the nature of existence. And I think that for so many people, as a person who studies Black negativity, we have a lot of Black studies scholars, whether they be more in the negationist sector or even just Afro-pessimists who may have a different idea of what ontology is. Many people believe that Black people do not possess an ontology whatsoever because of the level of or lack of relation that we have to the broader world. However, myself as someone who does study negativity, I like to think on ontology on different terms. I like to think of relation not as something that is necessarily affirmative or as a registry for determining who is and who is not human, but rather just the ways that relationality can also be a violent one. I mean, Black people walk or exist in the world. However, I think as many people talk about this sort of Black-white relation in the world by way of anti-Blackness, I like to think about the terms of the ways that relationality might look different among Black people, Black people among other Black people, and what happens when in a world that seeks to make decisions, like i.e. the No Humans Involved Code, apply it to Black people. In a world that makes that decision of who is and who is not human, what is the criteria that maybe Black people or Black subjects, or in some cases objects, make or determine as to how one would be considered that model or ideal or figuration of a Black human, most idealistically?
Yeah, so let's go back a little bit. So No Humans Involved, you say, is a police code. It's one that, like, within like sex worker circles, we've often talked about the fact that like sex workers who have died get categorized as, the cases are categorized as like cases of no human being involved. And obviously there is a human involved. But what's being signified here is like no human that matters. And so I've heard that within the context of sex work, but I think that your work points to the fact that it's like more broad to consider like a lot of categories of people who get like discarded. Is that
right? I'm glad that you're asking this question, because I think that this is the first time that I could have a proper discussion. A person that also labors in the sexual economy or identifies as a sex worker, whether it's currently or former. Typically what happens in this conversation when I walk into a academic setting, it's very different. But I think what's happening is we're seeing two different things, right? When I'm in sex working spaces, the No Humans Involved code literally means a particular thing. We're thinking about the ways that sex workers or people who labor in the sexual economy have been dehumanized, devalued, and once they're murdered, discarded in a particular way. Right? So to literally not exist or just be a being.
Right. Or murders that are not investigated whatsoever because they're like, oh, it was just a whore, doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As I would say, No Humans Involved in the context of Black studies or even academic setting, it looked different when we had the Jamaican Cuban theorist and Black studies scholar Sylvia Winter into the discussion. And so in that vein, what was interesting is we understood No Humans Involved to be a code that impacted the quote unquote Black male subject in a particular way, particularly if he was transient, jobless, houseless, or even a gang member, right? It was thought that they were being genocided in a particular way. And it's not to say that this is not the case. It's to say that I think it caused a bit of a disruption how we were to look at the No Humans Involved code more broadly, right? And so I think being immersed in these two worlds, I've developed a concern. What's happening here? Why does it feel like instead of these conversations coming together, they're going past each other? What happens when we are being very either abstract or being very discursive in the ways that we're talking about something like a No Humans Involved code? Now, I'm a person where I'll just be, quite frank. I know this is not something people agree with. I'm not a humanist. And what I mean by that is there's a particular register or a registry of humanism that I think comes from a very Western philosophical notion of being that I find that most cultures or most people who do not belong to the West were never able to really figure into. However, I think that various societies, and I think Sylvia Wynter, obviously, she talks about this, but she talks about it in different terms. What she proposes, because she believes that there was always a different way that societies pre-colonially saw themselves.
Yeah, right.
As human, she believes we need to kind of reorder that structure so that we don't use these Western pockets or language to define what a human being is.
Right.
Whether it's the human being in the sort of Western sense of through the Enlightenment period, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or whether it be the Western human in the sense of man, when we're thinking about the human in a biological,
right.
capitalistic, you know what I mean? Sort of.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Because as you were talking, I was thinking, my background is in Western philosophy. I was in philosophy for a long time. And I'm thinking about, you brought up the Enlightenment, and I'm thinking about a lot of Enlightenment philosophers who were trying to define what it is, like, not even just them, like starting with Aristotle, going like all the way back, but like throughout the history of Western philosophy of trying to define like what it is that a human being is. And typically, like, women are excluded from that because they don't have the same like relationship with rationality, according to these thinkers. And also, like, especially like, and within a US context in particular, but I think like across the world, also like Black people and people of color, like, also aren't seen to be like connected to rationality in a way that makes them human. So there's like an entire, I think, like,
right,
philosophical grounding for this notion of like what a human is and what a human isn't, and who then gets involved, which, I actually hadn't thought that much about until we were having this conversation. But this notion of like no human involved makes sense with given the like long intellectual history that kind of set that up.
Right, exactly. And so I think for those reasons, we've kind of gotten to this impasse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where myself thinking about the code, I think it's not for me as a person or not a person, whatever you want to call, right? Say who is and who is not human.
Right.
But what I noticed about the idea of what the human is, I do wonder, what has it actually done for Black people? What has been productive about it, right? So we have Saidiya Hartman that talks about this in Scenes of Subjection. We have another scholar, Zalika Iman Jackson, who talks about this in her work, Becoming Human. And in short, Zalika Iman Jackson says, is the Black a human being? She says hegemonically, yes, but it hasn't really gotten as much. When we talk about someone like Saidiya Hartman, she looks at the institution of slavery and she says, you know what, honestly, what if it wasn't about the process of dehumanization, but rather, what if it was about the idea of these Black, of these like, slaves or, enslaved African people, however you want to use the terminology. What if it was about them being human and that actually enticed the oppressors or the masters or the owners to provide or exude the suffering onto these people, which kind of changed the whole landscape.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is, what is exactly humanism doing, right?
Yeah.
So for a people that has suffered along the pretense of even thinking about it through the scope, as in the afterlife of slavery, as dehumanization, what happens now when people would do anything to be properly recognized or identified? Right?
Yeah. That question, though, is that paradigm shift to the question of like, well, what has being human got us is so deep, actually. To like shift and be like, okay, well, let's not just take that for granted, and then ask, actually, do we want that? What has that gotten for us? What does that mean? Is really interesting, I think.
Yes. I appreciate that, because I think getting back to this, horror question.
Yeah.
This is why I wanted to really talk about this. I said, well, if we're really going to think about what the Black core figure represents in culture,
Mm-hmm.
particularly for a group of people that has fought so hard for the recognition of humanity.
Yeah.
Happens when this core figure antagonizes that idea or defecates all over that idea.
Mm.
When we're thinking about these sort of Black revolutionary or Black nationalist struggles, even white Marxist struggles or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
we notice this common thread where whether it be the communists, whether it be leftists, however you identify, where there was always this concern of what to do with that lumpen figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with this, right? They are devoid of consciousness. They're, yada, yada, yada. Yet everyone, behind closed doors is going to one variation of this lumpen. And in this case, the whore, right? It was the prostitute or whoever it was. But what happens when people are so afraid and they're like, if we're not careful, one of these people could possibly lead us.
Yeah.
We don't want that figure. We don't want that at all. We have to really think about, so what do people really want? They've already decided the kind of figure that they do want. In what ways does the lumpen figure, such as the whore figure, how do they unfigure?
That's so interesting. Well, I was curious what you would say about, as you were talking, I was thinking about like the history of feminism and white feminism, second wave feminism, who like continually said throughout the entire, like all the discourse about sex work and pornography, because there was a huge like emphasis on pornography, but like pornography, sex work, prostitution,
Right.
there continued to be this refrain through that the people who are doing sex work are never doing it out of their own volition, that even if they claim to be, they're not, they're in bad faith, they've been brainwashed by the patriarchy, they have no, and I'm thinking about that as you're talking, because it seems connected, because when we deny like subjectivity to whores or to anyone and just assume that like they don't have the ability to think or to make their own decisions or to even tell their own story without that story being undermined as like not real or just a product of something else. That's like infuriating to me, but it feels like it's connected to what you're saying.
Absolutely. Because and I think this is the thing I think we've been recognizing, and it's something that I'm really trying to think more about in the writing as well, and just in general as a way to really think about organizing struggles too.
Yeah.
There are serious connections between the universal, and the reason why I really want to talk about this has been a critique that I've been having for quite some time. When people say sex worker, I still want to know, who are we envisioning?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. But between the sex worker and, if we were to go back, slavery.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, and not necessarily just the old idea of just, oh, no agency, because I think that agency is like a concept that I do not like talking about agency at all. People are like, oh yeah, you are such a negationist. I am. I do not talk about agency.
Yeah.
What I will talk about though is the overall perception and idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at someone like Terry Capsulis, who wrote Public Privates in the 90s. And one of the things in this one chapter that talked about cadavers, dolls, and like literally, prostitute sex workers. When we think about the slave or the Black slave, the idea that there was no sort of intellectual ability or capability to discuss or name pain or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about this in the context of the gynecological
practice, right.
In the Western sciences, and just the ways that when we're talking about the field of gynecology, she thinks of it as a type of performance.
Yeah.
But what happens when the sort of practice model, the dummy, the doll, the cadaver, the prostitute, is the person that is, or the slave is the person that is being examined, right? But they said that the sex worker or the prostitute did not have the ability to really tell anyone what they really needed them to know. They were like, their vaginal canal is abnormal.
Yeah.
Same things that were said similarly, literally about the slave, right?
Right.
So now we're getting into these notions of, their sexual libido is out of this world. They don't have the mental capacity to name pain.
Yeah.
Also, biologically, they're even constructed differently.
Yeah.
We have to really think about those things together. We have to really parse that out.
Yeah.
Because what happens when the worker just so happens to also be Black as well? We're talking about a double bindedness.
Right.
I'm really interested in that double binded nature.
Yeah.
So we get to a people that really, because they are not afforded or we are not afforded humanity.
Yeah.
Now we have to find a way to demonstrate what that proper human is, that proper Black human. And so we get to this Black whore figure who, once again, like I said, antagonizes that. The next step is now to think of how do we say that they are our own no human involved subject. But what happens with that? And one of the things that I'm trying to parse out is, just as I think it's dangerous to only just focus on the sort of discursive and abstract register of that, I also want to take advantage of that too. I want to think of the ways that some workers, prostitutes, whores, however Black folk identify, are also fucking with those concepts too. So I think it's on an ontological register, because I really want us to think about the nature of what I would say, I guess, is relationality between those subjects, those who are whores and those who are not.
Yeah.
Then I want to think about the neoliberal register of what happens when people actually come into contact with whores, especially over time, whether it be through academia, or even the museum industrial complex or the film industry. All of these industries that are now like finding it profitable to maybe just engage sex work a little bit, right?
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me because I feel like in all these spaces that aren't specifically like sex worker spaces, that there is always this assumption that there's like no whores in the room. No whores are part of the conversation, when we are often like hiding in plain sight, and there's something to me that's like very interesting about that, and about how sex workers get like othered, even when they're sitting right there, and part of the discussion. Yeah, I think that what you're saying is like very, very interesting. And one of the things that you said that I would love to go back to, because I've been thinking about it a lot, is, and I've been thinking about it in my own like development, as both like in my own intellectual development, but also in social development, but also like in my work in sex work. I feel like over time I've become increasingly more critical of like the sex work umbrella. And and it sounded to me like you were like hinting at that too. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about that, and what your thoughts on that are.
Yes. So I'll just be transparent. I think that I called myself a sex worker, or I call myself a former sex worker now, because I don't know, I guess that's the PC term. I feel like it's the thing that I'm supposed to say.
Yeah.
So I say it. And I'm finding that for a lot of other workers, that's also the case. I think that it's wise that such a terminology exists.
Yeah.
Yet I also think that some of the origins make me often feel outside of that. I think as I'm thinking about feminisms and whatnot, even if we were to say, well, this is the meaning of sex work, Terry and Williamson in this book called Scandalize My Name does remind us, there are different kinds of people who will just not call themselves that. And we have to be okay with that. You know what I mean? I think that to be a sex worker, it does come with a particular feminist ethic that I think that we have to be honest about, which is why I think that for me, it's much easier for me to say that I labor in the sexual economy than to always say that I am a sex worker. Now, I think by the the nature of me being a Black feminist, a Black queer feminist, however you think.
Yeah, yeah.
It's easier for me to also fall into the pocket of sex work, right? But for someone who does not give a fuck about feminisms, but also obviously needs support and all these other things, it's like, where does that go?
Right.
You know what I mean? Where does that go? I think that it comes with a sort of political implication when we say work. It's big political. I mean, most of the things that, happen are political, but I think it's such a political term that I think it's okay for us to sort of refigure and consider that there are going to be those who do not identify in those ways at all. And it's not even just because of these fraught notions of, where you're being problematic.
When We're Not Hustling is powered by Black Venom Digital. Black Venom Digital is a collaboration between myself and industry veteran Mr. Black Venom. Black Venom Digital aims to provide adult professionals and entrepreneurs with professional-grade web design, graphic design, and branding services that will inspire growth and success. At Black Venom Digital, we empower companions, creators, and entertainers with professional web design and branding. If you're looking for a new website or any other branding services and you work in the adult industry, please find out more at blackvenomdigital.com. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to your podcast. Doing so will help others find us. And if you're a sex worker who wants to come on the show and talk about your life outside of work, we would love to have you. Please send us an email with more information to nothustlingpod@proton.me. Yeah, it's so interesting. I've heard a lot of people, especially people who got into sex work young, who talk about the fact that, like, I didn't know I was a sex worker. I was just trying to survive,
I didn't know either.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I didn't know until I got to school.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's
that whole, but so there's that, and I think that's very real. And I also think, like, this is where I've been starting to think about this. So I remember when FOSTA SESTA passed, and there was a more like coalition among different types of laborers, because obviously now this is impacting the internet, and it's about prostitution, but it's actually like impacting all kinds of like people who are trying to work online as well. And so that brought together a lot of different kinds of sex workers to like fight against this. And that was like a really kind of nice moment where people were actually like trying to work together against something that was like bigger than all of us. But on the other hand, there also feels to me like there's a sort of flattening that happens when you're like, the job that I'm doing as a full service sex worker is not the same job as a FinDom is doing, who's only working online and doesn't do cash meets, is totally different than what a street-based worker is doing, is different, and I think we need to be able to, seems to me like we ought to be able to figure out how to like hold that these aren't the same, while also being able to talk about what the political implications of all of these things are. Right.
No, I agree, because I think that for me, it was more like, it was like a bouncing around.
Yeah.
What I had to do.
Right.
Like I said, I didn't really think of it either way. It wasn't until later on somebody was like, "You're a whore." And I did not know. I had no idea what was happening. And it took a few more years before I was able to say it. And I think the only reason why I said it was because, I'll just be honest, there was something unfortunate that was happening to me. Mm-hmm. It was better to say it before someone else tried to expose it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's what happens to some of us, because everybody's, it's not like everyone is out here. And I won't even call it a luxury, because I don't think it's a luxury. Sometimes people are just outed in a particular way. Yeah. That sometimes there is a type of online presence that, some of us have. And so people, there might be some benefits that come with that, but I don't see it as remotely safe.
No, I don't either.
Oh, I think that there's something very dangerous about what's happening.
Yeah.
Yet we are. Yeah. And we're constantly having to negotiate that every day.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you in saying, like, literally, the nature of our work is not all the same.
Right.
And it doesn't make it any less. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah. I don't even think we don't even have to say that. We don't have to assert any form of hierarchy or what we call like hierarchy in order to say that. Like, it's just.
Right. But it's not the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like you see that a lot in like a lot of tension in organizing circles where you're like, okay, so we're like a sex worker rights group. Well, who are we? And this, I think, is a question that you were asking earlier in this conversation. Like, okay, but who is it then that we're talking about?
Right.
You know, who is this mutual aid for? Who are we talking about?
Right.
What are our concerns? Because there are different types of concerns.
Absolutely. I think I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think this is also where the coalition piece has always been. It's hard for us.
It is hard. It is hard.
Hard, you know, because I think that we are in a very unique position. I don't think that the type of organizing that we've all had to do is anywhere reminiscent as other types of organizing. Mm-hmm. I feel like in some ways there's something very ahead of its time, but also latent and also behind the times. Mm-hmm. And I'll explain. Like, I think that we saw this a lot with certain coalitions that existed before, where there was a lack of specificity, where it sometimes felt like people were just grouped together. Yeah. And then we're finding out that people were experiencing racism or sexism, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Needed specificity. And I think oftentimes as workers, because we're like this strange class of people.
Yeah.
Whether it be the nature of the work or even just the nature of being, let's just face it, people do see us as biologically different. They see us as some type of weird species.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's what I meant with like, they're never in the room. Like normal people who show up at meetings and are academics or teachers or writers or whatever. They're not like really, you know.
No, we are a different species, right? Mm-hmm. So these people. So it's like, because we are, many times we're getting crammed and stuck together. And it's like, we just have to get by and one, well, the common goal is this.
Yeah.
And as, you know, although that's important, I can think of all the ways in which so many things get lost in that, down to even what you're saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like, why are we here? What is the work that we're trying to do? Mm-hmm. You know, all of us are not even coming in at the same entry point.
Right.
Still need to be educated about certain things. Let's just face it. Like, you know, you're talking about, you know, being full service. And I'm like, I had to go in and out. Yeah,
and yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's certain complexities that some people understand that sometimes we're just not going to all understand. And it's not the same thing. We can't use sameness or like, I don't want to use the expression colorblind, because I don't really like it. There's something weird. But there is a type of illusion. I'll say that. We have an illusion here where I think that oftentimes there's a lot of masking that takes place.
Yeah.
We don't always reckon with some parts, because these are the hard conversations.
Yeah, these are hard conversations. Yeah.
These are hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about, so years ago in Pittsburgh, when I used to do activism, which I don't do anymore now. I do writing, and I just like pulled out of that. But like for many reasons, but like when I was in it, one of the things that happened is that there was a story that came out. This is very like regional Pittsburgh based, but there was a story that came out about how the vast majority of prostitution arrests in Pittsburgh included instrument of crime charges. And so, you know, a prostitution arrest is a misdemeanor, and you would just get a citation for that. But instruments of crime that are is a statute that was set up in order to protect against like weapons and bulletproof vests and things like that were suddenly being used in these cases to talk about condoms and cell phones. So if you had a condom on you, you were going to commit a crime with that condom, the crime of prostitution. And if you had a cell phone where you like made the arrangement arrangements, that is now being used as an instrument of crime. Well, I'm thinking about your coalition building that you're talking about, and what some of the problems with coalitions are is because our strategy at the time was to build a coalition, which we did to fight this with trying to pull out everyone we could, the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, the Women's Law Center, all these people who could say, like, it is a bad idea to use condoms as like an instrument of crime, right? And the arguments that were being made were public health arguments, because we're talking about Planned Parenthood and everything. And they were saying, this is bananas, because if you are to do this, you're not only putting sex workers' health in danger, but sex workers are obviously sleeping with their clients without condoms because they don't want their charges to be trumped up. So you can't carry condoms on your person. And then those clients are going home and having sex with their wives who aren't broken in the way that we're broken and, like breaking them. And then it's like a public health crisis. And so what ended up happening is the DA was like, okay, fine, we won't use condoms as instruments of crime anymore. But then do you think that happened with cell phones? Like, no. And the reason it didn't happen with cell phones is because that only puts the whores in danger. Like, they can't have their phones. Who cares? They're expendable people anyways. But it's not like the Women's Law Center and the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and all these people stood by our side. Then they were just like, oh, cool. Now we got the condom thing fixed. Now we're out. And I mean, they didn't say it exactly like that, but that was the upshot of what happened. And I think that points to, like, people will come into coalition with us so long as it serves their needs. But when it's about just us and our needs, like, they don't.
And I'm glad that was the perfect example, because this also explains why so many of us are like crammed. I won't even just say, but it's like we're crammed together, because it's like there is this sort of us against the world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Energy happening. Because what you're literally signifying too is what happens when sex work, and you know what, that's the other thing. Okay, I'll just say it like this. I'm glad that you talked about public health issues. Mm-hmm. Many times when we're talking about sex work, that's often where it goes. And
right. Mm-hmm. Right.
We're talking about things as it relates to public health issues.
Right.
And the reality is there's public health, there's labor, but then there's also issues concerning race. There's issues concerning, I would say, gender, all these other kind of situations. And we have to really have honest conversations. One of the things that I was coming across, I think, with the coalition aspect was anti-Blackness.
Yeah.
That was like a thing where I was like, you know what? I'm going to have to take a step back on this one. I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'll say it like this. I liken it to, I belong to Black organizations. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no way that if somebody who was problematic, anti-Black, racist will be able to even join our formation. Yeah. But in these types of spaces, someone could say something, if it was a sex work space, someone could say something very racist and off color. Mm-hmm. But the thing that we have to prioritize, well, we all are workers.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm just like, see, and this is the issue.
Yeah.
We have to stop trying to kid ourselves. And I like this point about how you were talking about coalition and how these people were self-serving.
Yeah.
They knew it would impact themselves and other cities in a particular way. And they were like, oh, hell no.
Yeah.
On your own. And this goes back again to, this is a species thing.
Yeah.
We're a different species.
Yeah. Right.
Because if we were the same species, we would not be being interacted with this way. And I think that this is part of even the madness as it relates to even the overall label, like I said, in construction of sex work.
Well, yeah. And the different species thing, I think we could tie this really easily into our notion of who is alien, because if we look back at the history of the US in particular, our first immigration laws were anti-whore laws.
Hello.
That's what they were. the Mann Act, all of the things that came that were like, we can't let those Asian women into the country because they spread disease to our poor miners and our poor soldiers and their poor wives. And I think if we like separate ourselves from or don't recognize that like xenophobia and anti-immigration stuff is tied to anti-whoreness or anti-sex work legislation too, like it's easy to lose that.
Absolutely. And, I'm glad that you're bringing up this, this whole notion of like alienness and even immigration, because I'm even thinking about, we're talking about transness, how even transness, that is like another complication for people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That is like another way to also further, not even just criminalize, but just to alienate in a particular way as well. At this point. And I think this is why I think in many ways, I'm glad that we're talking about the nature of whores or sex work without the gendered language. You know what I mean? We really have to think about how, as quote unquote, this makeshift species, there is no man woman kind of category. There's just this quote unquote fake secret third thing.
That's so interesting. And we like everyone who's been in sex working spaces and in queer spaces knows that there's like so much overlap between those communities. And so, you can't, there's this notion in popular culture that sex workers are all women. But that's not the reality.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
But I am interested. So let's go. I want to like tie back to the first book project that you're working on when we're talking about that, because you are talking in that one very specifically about like, it seems to me, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, about like Black women's bodies and how those got like taken up. So can you like go back to that like notion of that? I can't remember exactly how you said it, but I liked it at the time, the form and unform or
oh yeah, no, for sure. Like I guess like figure, disfigure, and whatnot.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So I think what I've been really trying my best to do. So one of my specializations was in this notion of the Black female body. I like to put it in quotes because I just don't. The language of female is strange just as much as the language of male is to me.
Yeah.
Because I think that, we'll say something like race is a social construct, and then we'll say that gender is a social construct. But I'm like, sex is too. You know what I mean?
It is.
Sex is literally, somebody has to determine that. And there's social factors that determine it. I'm not saying this to say that science is not real and we shouldn't think of science. I'm just saying that I think that there's a certain type of determination made even within the sciences.
Yeah, because you see this with all the Olympic debates, as in like, what is a man and what is a woman? Well, it depends on whether you're counting like chromosomes, or if you're doing like hormone levels, or if you're doing body checks, or who knows? It like the answer to that is different based on like even using science, like how they're using it.
Exactly. And so I think one of the things that I've always been, I won't say always, but I'll say at least since I've had more of an awareness and the language for these things, is how, at least in the standpoint of art and performance, bodies are recognized or bodies perform, how they're perceived. And I think a lot, we talked about the Enlightenment period, but I think a lot about these paintings, you know what I mean? About, Olympia or something like that. And so I think that there was a critical practice of study that I needed to apply. I think literally I started with art and the notion of nature of the Black female body or its representations of it, because it gave me a better way or an entry point to really think about it in the biological sense as well. And so I was blessed that even though it was hard, I had a committee that really, really wanted me to understand. I took courses. I did all kinds of things. I even had to take art history courses on slavery just so that I could better understand it, not. And as somebody that's also a performance artist, I really, really needed to understand this. And and through this notion of anti-disciplinarity. And so finally, when I looked at these bodies, I think what I really was realizing is, as somebody that doesn't identify with womanhood at all, myself, I really wanted to rupture the language of femaleness in the language. And I think in many ways because as like a lot of my friends and I in the Scouts, like Blackness just changes and disrupts everything. So I think that when we're talking about the whole idea of even the nature of cisgender, that's just very made up too. And I think I would say in many ways, the complicated history of Blackness and the idea of gender, by whether we think of a person like a Hortense Spillers or whether you're thinking about a Sylvia Wynter, we know that as Black folk were deduced or reduced to just simply flesh, and a type of flesh that wasn't really detected in a particular way. There was no man and woman. It was just only body, flesh, male, female. That was really it. But based on those descriptors, people could just not have a gender. That was just really it. There was no gender. There was no concept of that. And so that made me want to take an even deeper look. So when I say that someone is a woman, but I'm also looking at all the ways in which there are people who are not women, but might be perceived as women, but who are women, but are not perceived as women. What is it doing? There's an explosion. There's a rupture. It's like my best friend, Nathan Alexander Moore. She studies Black trans femininity, and she looks at like literally the rupture of those concepts at the cellular level. She's doing really interesting things with that work. But we talked about it over time. These things are just very, very made up. So this is why my divestment from the language of actually taking seriously the nature or the language of femaleness or maleness came in handy when I decided to actually move toward the language of femme, and not femme as a replacement for woman either, or femme as a replacement of femaleness. But I was really invested in the ways that feminists had a type of like sliminess and like that I felt like it wasn't just normal, quote unquote, femininity. It was in excess.
It's like an exaggerated femininity.
It was exaggerated, right? All of those things. And so I really wanted to take that up. So in this first book project, I'm really trying to parse through it. And the ways that people really have an allergic reaction, it's what I like to call that relationship between the philia and the phobia. So,
it's interesting. A good friend of mine, Rachel Ann Jolie, she wrote a book called Rust Belt Femme, and she grew up in Ohio in Cleveland, and she talks about like femme identity in it. But one of the things, she grew up very like poor, and talks about how femness was often also associated with like lower class, like, and so, and kind of sex work aesthetic, and this exaggerated the nails and the lashes and the like exaggerated femininity. And and I think that I very much resonate with your like description of femme too, because I feel like there is something more gritty and more exaggerated and more performative about that kind of like femininity.
Yes. No, I really like how you even, told that story, because my good friend, Nick Brady, we've really been experimenting with just the language of defiguration or disfiguration as a type of way, like the word ooze just kept coming to mind. Really thinking about what happens when something can't even hold itself up anymore. It's falling apart. And I think in work, that's the femme, which is why it made it so much easier to really think more and start transitioning to now looking at that whore figure.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting that you say that about the oozing too, and like the not holding form, because I feel like fatness and femness is often like so like connected too. And like the notion of like, what is a fat femme? Well, a fat femme is somebody who like refuses to stay within the bounds, you know,
within the bounds, right?
Within the bounds. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's to your point, staying without the refusal to stay within the bounds. This is where we can start actually getting more specific. We start talking about the trans femmes.
Yeah.
We start looking at the femmes who labor in the sexual economy.
Yeah.
We start looking at the femmes where maybe it may not even be a clear registry of they worked in the sexual economy, but there's something weird that happens once people, especially a lot of Black femmes I'm finding, are just very figured early as whores.
Mm-hmm.
I tell this story in the second, book project, but I was introduced to work around 18 or so. And honestly, probably earlier than that. Like I was a kid. And I was one of those very sheltered kids, but I was just going for a walk. I was a walking ass child. I would beg my parents, please let me walk around the corner, because they just did not let me do that.
Okay.
But I think the one time that I did, literally, I was offered money. Sex. I was about 13.
Yeah.
And so these ideas, they start coming early. People are like literally trying to feed those things to you or socialize you very early.
Yeah.
That's just how they see you. When I always tell the story, when I was 15 years old, I was literally, hit on by a cop. You know what I mean? And my parents were so angry. They didn't even know what to do. Like they tried to contact the department. They tried to contact other people, but that was just what it was.
Yeah. Right.
I was pulled over by a cop to be hit on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As a Black girl.
Mm-hmm.
So when I grow up, and when I say grow up, still a teenager, and like I said, I was introduced at 18, in that way, more formally or more properly, just hanging out with my best friend. We were chilling, wearing booty shorts. It was like early September, so we could still wear the shorts. It was fun, and just hanging out with a bunch of young Black men, just having the time of our lives in a place, chilling. And I remember, we were stopped by the cops. Now, it's interesting in this particular scenario, you would have thought, given the nature of how, sometimes the police operate, that they would have approached the group of young men first. Yeah. That was not what happened. And we were stopped and sat on the side of these railroad tracks for X amount of time, where there was a Black woman police officer that antagonized us because she said we were whores. We looked like whores. We were whores. And then proceeded to talk about all the ways in which she must protect young Black men from people like us.
Wow. Yeah.
Talking about fictional Black men. Then she starts talking about her Black sons. Runs the gamut of how they must be protected from whores like us.
Yeah, which goes back to like the anti-immigration stuff too. Like we have to protect the Americans from these women who are these whores that are coming in and negatively influencing everybody.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so, you always you think of that in those ways. And I was like, oh, you start to really recognize it, whether it be, I'm a pastor's daughter. I know people are like, what? But I am. Yeah. And you start to see it in these spaces. You see it in church. Yeah. You see it in school. I saw it at camp.
Well, it's such a weird bind though, because you have this notion of like these deviant women who are like causing all kinds of mayhem. And then on the other hand, this notion of women as victims who can't make any decisions. And you're like, well, but which one is it?
Right. It's literally based on, it's not logical. Yeah. People like to use the expression rational or irrational. Right. Like actually these are the people who set the order up. Yeah. And yet all of their rationale is irrational. Yeah. All of what is logical is illogical. None of it makes sense. And it's deliberately so that it doesn't make sense,
right?
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's all, yeah. I mean, but yeah, I think I'm thinking about like going back to this notion of like bodies that can be contained and like feminist and like excess. And I think I was telling this story the other day. I can't remember if it was on the podcast, but like I am a pear-shaped person with like wide hips and a big ass. And I was like that even when I was skinny and I was young. I still had like the ass, And when I was a teenager, like I would be walking down the street and cars would pull over to like talk to me about my ass, and I'm like, I'm just walking. like, I'm just trying to get down the street, and I think that and I just got accustomed to that. Like, of course, like cars are going to pull over and talk to me about my body, of course. And then I'm like, no, I don't think that that's like a normal thing to do, actually.
No, it's not. You get accustomed to it. Like, I think that there's just that's part of,
yeah.
That's also part of like learning how to survive and learning how to live.
Right. And so like when you're in these bodies that get like politicized like that, it shapes you. It shapes how you go about doing things. And
Exactly.
Yeah. So all of this conversation is so interesting and so rich. I feel like we could like do this all day, but but yeah, I mean, I think that thinking about, the other thing that I was thinking when you were talking about Blackness, like disrupting all of these like categories, is I was wondering if, I started to think about our notions of like what a woman is, and that being so tied to fragility, especially for like white women, and how that may just like not apply or not make any sense for Black women and for women who have been like have come like historically out of slavery and have been thought to have like working bodies and fleshy bodies, like you're saying. Like that is like a disruption of like what we think of as like women and what women need to be like saved from or protected from. So I think that brings up this whole notion of like what is a woman?
I don't even know.
Yeah.
Because I think like what's funny? My best friend and I, we did this exercise like I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago, where we were laughing so hard because I was, having that conversation where I'm like, I don't identify as a woman. But we were also like, well, what is that? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, what is it? Because I think that this is the part where it gets messy, but it gets messy in a very generative way. Because if we were even to think of all of the transphobes and all these other folks, there's almost nothing that they can say about womanhood that doesn't equate to something that's very superficial. You know what I mean? It's periods. And it's just like, okay, so if somebody goes through menopause, is that the moment that they stop being a woman? Oh, well, something about breasts and breastfeeding. Okay, so what happens when you don't have breasts anymore? Something happens. Yeah. Do you stop being a woman? Oh, well, it's about having a uterus. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Right. And what if you have a hysterectomy? Then are you not a woman anymore? Yeah.
Are they not? And so then it comes down to, you see things about people's facial structures, right? And I tell people all the time, like, if I had to go based on people's arguments, I would definitely, you know what I mean? Based on what people perceive to be as a woman, I wouldn't fit a lot of those categories either. Yeah. There's like a particular assumeness about it. The goalposts are always moving. And I think in many ways, it's just like, I think for me, a woman is a person that just is. You know what I mean? You just are or you are not. And it's not for me to say whether someone is or is not. Once you are, you just are. And I think that that's just what I think I've just come to grips with.
Yeah. Well, it's also, it's a political identity, but it's also like what what people take that to mean. Like I'm thinking now of Simone de Beauvoir, who said like one is not born but made a woman, and that feels so like that kind of underlies this whole notion.
Because I think like the reality is we must disrupt these notions of biological essentialism.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's literally, even for the people that are transphobic, I'm like, even this, you're not doing it very well either. It's so fragile for you. This is why you often behave this way.
Yeah.
You do too much. You know what I mean? If we said thou protested so too greatly or whatever, that's giving.
Yeah. Right.
It's not, this is how you know it's real because it was made real.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hate to, like you said, that language of made.
Yeah.
It's made.
Yeah.
It's real because it was made real.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, whether people realize it or not, that especially goes for the cisgender woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's only real because it was made real.
Yeah.
And look at all the things that you have to do to maintain it.
Yeah. To constantly prove that you are that thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, that is a good place to end. I like to end with 3 questions, though. So the first one is, what are you reading?
What am I reading? Oh, this is a good question. I'll be honest. At the moment, my own stuff.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
I'm just trying to edit, so I'm reading my own stuff. But what I will say is I have been reading, because of some of the things that I'm working on, a little bit of Kara Keeling right now, The Witch's Flight. There's some film stuff that I'm trying to get a better understanding on around feminists. So I've been reading Kara Keeling. So that's actually one.
Okay.
I also have been reading, there's a book that came out last year on showgirls. That I started reading.
Oh, I don't know what book that is.
It's also in that as well. So there's like a work of collected essays.
Okay.
Responding to the film Showgirls. And so
interesting. Cool. Yeah. And what are you listening to? Either music or podcasts?
I have been listening recently musically to a lot of Jasmine Sullivan and also McGee. That's just I've been doing. McGee is like MK _GEE. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And what are you excited about?
You know what? I am excited about the I Hate My Job book.
Me too.
I'm releasing so plug there. And I'm also excited. I recently finished a critical porno that I was working on called Becoming on Humanist Edging. And I'm excited to start doing some screenings this year. So I'm excited about
Nice. Well, it was so great to talk to you. Where can people find you?
Where can people find me? You can find me at Haunted Femme. That's HAUNTEDFEMME.
Nice. On all of the platforms?
Yeah, like on Instagram mostly.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, it was so great to talk to you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of When We're Not Hustling. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at sapiotextual or visit my website at jessiesage.com. You can follow the show on all socials at Not Hustling Pod and visit our website for more information at nothustling.com. The show is produced by Emily Foster. The music is by Benjamin J. Benamati. Signing off. Have a great week.